Hey, what's up, Spencer? My name is Everybody and welcome back to my channel. Can you believe that already another month is gone? March is over and we are into April. Finally, it is spring and daylight savings is over. So let's jump into everything that I read during March. I had a pretty good reading month in March in which I got 13 books done. I am also still up to date with my current yearly reading goal. I am on track for my yearly reading goal, so I'm very excited and proud of myself for doing so. So the first book that I finished reading in March was The Fever by Megan Abbott, and I gave this book 1 star. So this book follows our 3 main characters, Deanie, her brother, and her dad, as a mysterious sickness sweeps through a town, affecting a bunch of middle school girls. Honestly, I hated just about everything to do with this book. It was terrible. Literally nothing happened in this book, and a large majority of it was just anti-HPV vaccine rhetoric, and not even in a way that like really pushed the story forward. It was something that the story even said like, oh yeah, this wasn't even anything related to what's actually going on in this town. So there was just a bunch of anti-HPV vaccine rhetoric for no reason, which I find to be extremely reckless and dangerous because there's never really been any sort of concern around the HPV vaccine. So the fact that this book is making up random shit about the HPV vaccine is just going to cause unnecessary fear around the HPV vaccine. This is 2022. We've all lived a few years in the pandemic now. We all know how important it is to get vaccinated and have vaccines. We all know how dangerous misinformation and disinformation about vaccines is. And this was published before the pandemic, but either way, I don't like anything about this book because what is it even saying? Most of the time, I believe that books don't need to like say something outside of just telling a good story, but this book, like literally, what was the point of this? Why were you saying? If you wanted to have like some sort of like conversation about vaccines and how we know whether we're able to rely on them, or when we should start questioning science and what doctors and stuff are telling us, like that's stuff that is legit and valid and would be interesting to see. This does not do that. This is just bullshit, and I don't encourage anybody to read it because there is nothing of substance here. There is no sort of conversation going on. There is no sort of story going on. Everything about it is stupid, and don't read this. Next up, I have Horrid by Katrina Leno, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book follows the basic story narrative of a huge change happens into the main character's life, and so now they need to move into this old home that has been in the family for a long time that the main character had no idea even existed until right now when they're moving into it. Something that I have seen done hundreds of times before, and is something that I think is a little bit overplayed at this point, but this book did it incredibly well. Wow. I really loved the characters in this book. I loved the unconventional coping skills that the character had. I loved the conversation of eating non-food substances. Everything about the story. It was so good. Oh my goodness. And I gotta tell you, so I was reading this in audiobook form, and I got in the car and I put this on, and I didn't think that I was gonna get to the end of the audiobook by the time I got home. So I was listening to it, and I don't know the last line is coming, but so I hear the last line, and then I hear, "Thank you so much for listening to Harper Audio." And I screamed because I didn't know that that was going to be the last line. And oh my God, this was I don't know, just everything about it was incredible, to the point where I'm not really somebody who likes to reread books like as soon as I finish reading them. It can take me like a really long time before I desire to reread a book again, but this one was so good that the second I finished it, I was like, holy shit, I want to start reading it again already. Next up, I have The Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare, and I actually didn't rate this play. Do you guys like my giant Norton Shakespeare? This is 2,000 pages, over 2,000 pages. And it's written on like tissue paper so that it can be this small. So I read The Taming of the Shrew because I've been trying to increase the amount of Shakespeare that I consume, and I'm not going to give this play any sort of rating because I didn't like it, and I know that part of the reason why I didn't like it is because there was a lot that I was missing from it, and that's why I'm not going to give it a rating. It's Shakespeare. I know that I was missing a lot because it was my first time reading through it, and honestly, I was so bored with my first reading of it that that was part of the reason why I wasn't absorbing so much of it. So The Taming of the Shrew is a play about a guy who has to get this bitchy older sister to get married so that he can marry the pretty nicer younger sister, I guess. But I didn't really understand it because for it being a book about, or a play about taming women, I felt like there was barely any women in it. And nothing was happening. Everybody was just like standing around talking all the time. There's plenty of Shakespearean plays that I do like. I really like A Midsummer Night's Dream. I like Twelfth Night. I like Othello. This one I did not like, purely due to the fact that everybody was talking all the time and that was just about it. That was very boring for me. I didn't give a shit, and thus I didn't care, and I continue not to care. Next up, I have Vanishing Acts by Jodi Picoult, and I gave this book 2 stars. So this book follows Delia, who works as a search and rescue person. What she does is she has a dog that she is trained to search for people when they go missing, you know, kids when they wander off, or hikers when they get lost on trails, whatever have you. But one day she finds out that she was actually missing, where her father apparently kidnapped her, and now she has to go into this whole entire thing about finding out who she really was before she got kidnapped, and etc., etc. This book started out really well, but as it went on, the more I was like, no, for 2 main reasons. The first one being the sideline with Andrew in jail made absolutely no sense whatsoever, and it stopped very suddenly, and like that was it. This was written in early 2000s, and during the point in which Andrew is in jail, there is a lot of talk about like race wars in jail, and how like when you go in jail there's like different gangs. There's the gangs for the whites and the blacks and the Latinos and whatever. Please let me know if you've been in jail recently. Is this something that is still a thing today? Are there still like race-based gangs in gyms or in jails? Or are gangs more diverse now? I don't know what kind of question this is, but this is a legit question. I know that like used to be a thing, so is that still a thing? Or are gangs more like hobby-based, I guess? I don't know. And the other thing that I really didn't like about this book was the conversation around alcoholism. That was kind of the overarching theme of this, was kind of how alcoholism affects like 3 generations of a family. And I didn't like the conversation that was going on for a good portion of this. You know, I always really don't like it when a character has yet to reveal something about themselves and a main character will find out about it through like a second party and go to that character and be like, you lied to me just because like I met you 12 hours ago and you already didn't tell me this like super deep dark secret. Like, that's a lie. No, it's not. I hate it when that happens. Like, there needs to be like a considerable amount of time that passed that you haven't learned this information yet before you can start saying that somebody lied to you by neglecting to tell you this information. When you've just met people, I hate it when you just met people and characters will say, oh, you lied to me because you didn't tell me this. But no, shut the fuck up. Give them a fucking chance. They're not gonna say, hi, how are you? Did you know that I accidentally committed manslaughter back in 1972? Like, that's not the way that things work. Also, I really don't like that it kept on pushing the narrative that you can never trust an alcoholic. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, and you can never trust an alcoholic. And while I totally understand how when you love an alcoholic, there are a lot of times in which you put your faith into them and they relapse over and over and over again, and how painful it is to put faith into that and have it continuously be broken. I totally understand, but also pushing the narrative that you can never trust an alcoholic, even after they've been sober for 25 years, is such a ridiculous standard to have. I understand being skeptical when people are first, like, establishing their sobriety, but after a certain amount of time, like, you have to trust somebody again. They've put in the work, they've done the effort, they have changed to show you that they're doing this and they're becoming that different person that you wanted them to be. And if we don't give alcoholics the ability to earn back trust and love and support, then what's even the point of trying to be sober in the first place? If you're gonna say, yeah, sure, you've been sober for 25 years, but that doesn't mean anything because of what you did 25 years ago, what does an alcoholic, what is the motivation that an alcoholic has to even be sober, right? I mean, if they don't have the ability to gain back their family and their friends, and if they don't have the ability to have some semblance of a normal life, what is even the point of getting sober in the first place then? And of course, this is all on an individual level. I totally understand people who cut out family or friends who have addiction for whatever reason or another. That's all on you, case by case thing. I totally understand. I have somebody in my life who has been sober for about 5 years that I currently do not allow into my life. So I understand that. But you can't just make blanket statements that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. You can never trust them ever again. Like, that's a ridiculous standard to have. It's not possible, and it's also not fair. Next up, I have both The Sea of Monsters and The Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan, the second and third book in the Percy Jackson series. I have been working on reading these books as a part of a video that I've been doing where I go through the entire Percy Jackson series, but I'm not sure if I'm going to continue in this project because I'm not fully enjoying myself. Overall, I give these books about 3 stars on average, 2.5 to 3 stars. I personally feel that the Percy Jackson series has a lot of potential. And I know, I can hear you already screaming at your screen because I said that the Percy Jackson series has potential. Not that it's great, that it just has potential and that's it. And like, I understand that this is like a kid's series, that this is like a middle school level series, but I do also still expect a minimal level from characters and from plot, even if something is written for kids. I feel like if it's been done well, then it's also easily enjoyable for adults. And I know there are a lot of adults who do enjoy these series, so I do kind of have a higher expectation for these books, and Rick Riordan is not living up to the expectation that I have. The plot for me is very flat and very boring and very straightforward. Percy gets everything handed to him all the time. He doesn't work for half of the stuff that goes on in these books. And there's very little character development. There's lots of times in which I think that there's going to be some sort of character conflict, or we're going to get deeper into a character, but we don't. All the characters are like so flat. Nobody make any character arcs. Nobody really like changes. People make decisions without taking any time to consider the long-term consequences. I don't know. I don't hate this series, but it's also something that I don't really desire to finish because it's lacking so much for me. I think I will end up finishing the 4th and 5th book in the series, mainly because of the fact that I own the 4th and 5th book, and now that I'm this far, I kind of just want to finish it out, just see how this basic plot ends, but I feel like I'm not going to be reading the 4th and 5th book for at least a few months because I don't have much of an interest in it at the moment. Next up, I have Last Girl Ghosted by Lisa Unger, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book follows our main character who meets a guy on a dating app called Ember, which I think is cute, a little off for Tinder, and they hit it off. Things go well for a little while, a couple of weeks, a couple of short months, and then one day he just ghosts her. He just disappears, and she goes, "Oh, that super sucks. Like, I really like that guy. I wonder what happened, but, you know, whatever, I'll just move on." Until a detective shows up on her doorstep, and it turns out that the guy that she had been on a couple of dates with had ghosted girls in the past, and all the girls that he ghosted ended up going missing. So now she has to find out what the hell's going on with this guy before she herself goes missing. I thought this book was really interesting. I really liked the writing style. It was kind of written in a way, kind of like if you've seen the Netflix show You, in which the main character is like narrating it towards another person. So there would be parts in which she would say like, "Oh, I rounded the corner and there you were, standing under the lamp, looking the way that you always did." Like, you know, where she's talking like to the guy as opposed to more like to the reader type thing. So I really liked that writing style. And it was really interesting, but unfortunately it didn't have that little extra oomph that I needed for it to be a full 5 stars, so it's a 4 stars. And I really did like the reference of like co-parenting in here as like friend co-parenting, where you and your friend like raise a child together as opposed to like single parenting, or I don't know. I know it's a thing that's becoming very popular and a lot more millennials are doing it, so I thought it was interesting to see it mentioned in a book. I haven't seen it mentioned before, so I don't know. There you go. That's a thing. Next up, I have The Stranger Behind You by Carol Goodman, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book follows our 2 main characters. One is Joan, who is a journalist who writes an expose exposing a guy to be a sexual predator, a very powerful elitist guy, and he ends up killing himself. And then the other main character is his wife, who is trying to prove that her husband didn't end up doing all of these sexual assault allegations, and that this journalist is just like being slanderous and taking his name in vain, and he didn't she wants to clear his name. I really like this story. I have started to find that I really like stories in which it is from two perspectives of opposing sides, because I like to see how each side like justifies that they're right and how you see things from people's point of view, because nobody ever does things because they're a bad person. Everybody thinks that they're correct and that their point of view is right. So I just like having that dual narrative, the opposing narrative of both people thinking the opposite thing while also being like, no, I'm right, and here are the reasons why I'm right, even though it's the exact opposite of that person who is also right for their own reasons. I thought that the plot was really well executed. I really liked how it talked a lot about the Me Too movement, of sexual assault, of women's oppression, not just in today's day and age, but it paralleled it to a story that took place in like the 40s or the 50s or something like that. Either way, it was very well interesting, well tied together, and there was like the slightest bit of a supernatural aspect to it, but written in a way that you were like, was it a ghost or was it just the imagination the whole time? I also think that that's always interesting to have in books, where you have that little bit of not knowing whether it's supernatural or psychological. Next up, I read Broken by Jenny Lawson, and I gave this book 5 stars. This is Jenny Lawson's third autobiography, and the third book of hers that I have read, and the third book of hers that I have given 5 stars, because all of her books are incredible. Her autobiographies talk about all of the crazy things that she has done and been through. She likes taxidermy, and she has ADHD, so she ends up doing all of these really crazy things, while also dealing with mental health issues and physical health issues, and she just does such an incredible job of weaving together like these really deep, touching stories that are about these really dark things, while also remaining like hilarious to the point that you're like gonna pee your pants, because she's talking about some crazy ass shit. Like, if you read this book, you're gonna find yourself Googling, do I have butt worms? Because that's gonna be a genuine concern that you have after reading this book. But if that's the type of concern that you like having after reading books, like, definitely read this one. I highly recommend all of Jenny Lawson's stuff, because her stuff is so funny and yet so relatable and so human. Alright, so the next few books that I'm going to be talking about, I read for my Spring Into Reading-a-thon, and that video is going to be coming out at some point in the future, hopefully soon, because Spring Into Reading-a-thon is over, and I've recorded all my clips, so all I need to do is edit it together, but I haven't done that yet. So my next 4 books are from that, so if you want to hear more about those books, make sure you subscribe so then you can see when the video does eventually come out. So first up, I have The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna by Juliet Grimes, and I gave this book 4 stars. This book is a biography written by the granddaughter of the main character, Stella Fortuna, and it follows her life and the 7 or 8, depending on how you count it, times that she almost died, and then clearly the time in which she did finally die. So this is following her throughout her entire life. I thought that this story was very interesting. I really liked the historical context. I really like historical fiction books, and this is that in a way, but it is based on a true person and things that actually happened in their life. But, you know, because the granddaughter wasn't there for all the conversations, you know, that part is fictionalized. But either way, it is very good. I think it's a good conversation about how women are like forced into doing things no matter how much they don't want to, no matter how much they express themselves, and how many women have just had their entire lives ruined and thrown away because they had to do what their families told them to. And also like how intergenerational trauma affects an entire family. Something that I really liked about this is that I'm pretty sure that Stella Fortuna was asexual and or aromantic, because that is like a big point in the book, is that she does not want to get married ever to anybody, and she never has like any sort of romantic entanglement with anybody ever, and she has like this clear aversion to sex, which can be placed as a sexual trauma that she had, but also I feel extends deeper than that. So I know that you can't like put labels like that onto people when they don't have the ability to use the labels for themselves, but I also like to find historical people that you can look at and say, ah, they most likely did have the same sexuality or gender identity as me, and be able to have some solidarity in that. So if you want to read something that has someone from a historical time that very much seems to be ace, then there you go, here's a book for you. Next up, I have House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book follows our main character, who has the job of being an inspector of orphanages for magical children. And one day he is sent to an extra special orphanage for extra magical children, and it is his job to determine whether the children are being properly and should stay in this orphanage, or if they're being abused and the orphanage should be shut down. This story was cute, it was sweet, it was simple, it was gay. If you want something that's just very cozy and fluffy and doesn't have like too much conflict in it, is just very like heartwarming, then this is definitely the story for you. But that was why I gave it 3.5 stars, is because it does, I personally don't feel it has enough conflict in it. I wish there was just a little bit more pressure. Like it's never like Mr. Baker is, like, the orphanage is definitely going to be shut down if he doesn't put in a good report. It's just that they'll, like, maybe shut it down, but who knows? So, I don't know. I wish there was a little bit higher at stakes, but overall, it was very good. It was cute. I see why a lot of people say they like this. Oh my god, why is my nose so fucking itchy? Jesus fucking Christ. Next up, I have Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Montescalco, which I gave 2 stars. This book follows our main character, who is a Strega, which is Italian for witch. She and her entire family is Stregai. Strega. I think Strega is the singular and Stregai is the multiple. Anyway, she and her family live a nice little happy life, all on their own, hiding from human witch hunters, until one day our main character's twin is brutally murdered, and now the main character has to figure out who killed her to try and exact revenge. This book was okay. If you like it, I guess I can see why, but for me, a lot of things were just way too convenient for me. I wasn't super big into the characters or the plot, and like, even though there wasn't anything like really wrong with it, I kind of just found myself waiting for the story to be over, which is why I gave it 2 stars, because there's nothing about it that really made me want to keep reading it. I was kind of just waiting for it to be done. Next up, I have The Fated Sky by Mary Robinette Kowal, and I give this book 4.5 stars. This book is the second book in the Lady Astronaut series that takes place. It is kind of a science fiction dystopian story that takes place if an asteroid hit Washington, D.C. in the 50s, and thus we had to expedite the space program so that we could end up colonizing the moon and Mars, because now that an asteroid has hit the Earth, the entire Earth is going to die, as well as humans. I absolutely love this book. I loved the first book. I loved this book. It is it can get very like politicky and very sciencey, but I think that it is done pretty well because things also move very quickly and thus there's always something happening to keep driving you forward. You're always kept on the edge of your seat as what's going to happen next. You never can expect what's going to happen. I really did like how, even though this is set in the 1950s, there are a lot of POC characters. There are quite a few queer characters, very hidden figures. It's just so good. There's a third book. I'm very excited to read that. And then a fourth book is going to be coming out at some point in the future. So also excited to read that one. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it yet, please, please do. It is so good. Holy shit. All right. And last but not least, I finished Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book follows Emmy as she goes back to her hometown after being away for over 10 years, or almost 10 years, sorry, following a bad breakup with her high school boyfriend. And it turns out that her ex-boyfriend that drove her out also screwed over 2 other witches in her town, and now they're all going to team up to bring down this shitty-ass guy. There were plenty of things about this book that I did like, mainly the fact that there were bi-witches in this. Love me some bi-witches, yes. I'm all about queer contemporary witches right now. I'm loving it, and this definitely falls in the queer contemporary witch category. But there were also quite a few things about this that I was like, One, the fact that our main character, Emmy, dated this guy for like 3 months and then let this guy ruin her life to the fact that she she gave up her magic for almost 10 years because she was so traumatized by being broken up by a 17-year-old boy after dating him for a few months. And I might have been able to forgive that a little bit more if it wasn't for the fact that Talia was basically Garrett. So basically, the shitty ex-boyfriend, she was the same exact person, except she was a girl. So does that make it okay that she also, like, dated and then dumped a whole bunch of people and broke a lot of people's hearts? Like, they make it out that the reason why they're, like, getting back at Garrett is because he's a player and he, like, deserves it. Like, this is all the karma of that. But, like, Talia is, I'm going to argue, worse than Garrett. Like, they reference the fact that she broke a girl's heart so bad that the girl ended up creating, like, a literal shrine to Talia. And I thought maybe the author would do something to kind of have us interact with Garrett and really see how shitty of a guy he is so we could really feel that he deserves this, but we barely interact with him, so he doesn't feel like a shitty person to me. He just feels like some guy. I know that it sucks, but guess what? Everybody was shitty when they were 17 and in high school. I know that you probably want to get back at this guy because he was shitty to you when he was 17 and in high school, but guess what? That's what happens when you're 17 and in high school. You were shitty when you were 17. I was shitty when I was 17. If you're 17 right now, guess what? You're a piece of shit. I'm sorry, but that's just how it works. Alright, and I did DNF 2 books during this past month. I DNF'd The Extraordinaries by T.J. Klune, so that is the same person who wrote The House on the Cerulean Sea. Though I did like House on the Cerulean Sea, did not like Extraordinaries. I only got about 50 pages into it before I had to DNF because I did not like the main character that much. He was that annoying, I couldn't deal with it. And I also DNF'd To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I got a third of the way through it and it felt so repetitive to me that I couldn't see myself going through a couple hundred more pages of the character passing out and then waking up and then talking to people and then traveling and then talking to more people and then traveling and then passing out and then waking up and then just so much over and over and over and over again. It was too much of a slog. I couldn't do it, unfortunately. Alright, so those were all the books that I read in the month of March. I got quite a few that I'm excited to read in April. What were your thoughts? Have you read any of these books? If so, leave your comments down below. I would love to hear everything about it. But besides that, make sure you stay safe, wear a mask, get your vaccine, and have a fantastic day. Bye!